Hello, I'm Arkady Sakhartov. Today I'm presenting a study co-authored with Tim Folta entitled Getting Beyond Relatedness as a Driver of Corporate Value. What increases the value of multi-business or multi-product firms? The response to this question is of great importance to managers, investors, and researchers. Many prominent firms like Apple are involved in multiple businesses, and we want to know whether such firms can add value above and beyond the value their businesses would create if operated as standalone firms. We are particularly curious about how some multi-business firms can excel because existing research on corporate diversification has been split between reporting the diversification discount that multi-business firms incur relative to the comparable single business firms on the one hand, and some weak evidence of the diversification premium on the other hand. The dominant explanation for how diversified multi-business firms can add value has been the so-called relatedness hypothesis. Richard Trammell defined relatedness as the similarity of resource requirements between businesses in a multi-business firm. Such similarity enables the firm to transfer resources between its businesses. Conversely, the lack of such similarity increases the distance between the businesses and makes such resource transfers unprofitable. Although the relatedness hypothesis was an important stepstone in understanding what determines value in multi-business firms, empirical support of the hypothesis was mixed, with only half of tests confirming it. In part, the relatedness hypothesis received only limited support because the idea was incomplete. Indeed, when multi-business firms like Apple transfer resources between their businesses, relatedness matters a lot. Thus, relatedness of the smartphones to the personal computers facilitated redeployment of resources at Apple, announced by the firm in 2007. However, the primary inducement for that redeployment, and thus the primary driver of the value received by Apple, was the superior performance of the smartphone business that was the destination for resource redeployment, vis-a-vis inferior performance of the PC business that was the origin of the redeployed resources. In that context, inducements represented the opportunity cost for Apple's continued use of most of its resources in the underperforming PC business. To more fully represent the role of inducements, let me switch to the pair of industries that we use for the illustration in our study. So consider a firm that combines medical devices with industry classification code 384 and laboratory equipment with industry code 382. This graph shows the average returns on asset in the two industries over 18 years. Based on this, we wouldn't expect the laboratory equipment to be the destination and the medical devices to be the origin for resource redeployment in the firm. Of course, returns in the two industries are random and are distributed around their means. Here we can see 95% confidence intervals for returns in the medical device and the laboratory equipment industries. There are now many scenarios in which the laboratory equipment business outperforms the medical device business that would induce redeployment of resources from the latter to the former. The most favorable scenarios are present when the laboratory equipment is at the top of its plausible returns, while the medical devices are at the bottom. Still, we do not know whether it is best for the firm to redeploy here, here, or maybe here. We will use a formal model for that, but for now, let's experiment with this empirical illustration. Let's first keep the trends for the returns and introduce a current return advantage of the laboratory equipment over the medical devices in year 1991. You can see that possible advantages of the destination over the origin for future resource redeployment increase accordingly. Let's return to the actual distribution and now make returns in the laboratory equipment more volatile. Again, you can see that possible advantages of the destination over the origin for future redeployment grow accordingly. Finally, the odds of the scenario that is most favorable for redeployment, where returns in the destination are at the top of the distribution at the same time, returns in the origin are at the bottom, depend on the correlation of those returns with each other. So let's dissect the graph at some point and look at the sectional view that illustrates this correlation. If correlation is positive, returns in the two businesses converge to each other, and the scenario most favorable for future resource redeployment is unlikely. If alternatively, return correlation is negative, returns in the laboratory equipment are very likely to be at the top, the same time when returns in the medical devices are at the bottom, thus inducing redeployment of resources from the origin to the destination. Thus, this empirical illustration has introduced us to the three dimensions of inducements for resource redeployment: the current return advantage, return volatility, and return correlation, which are used in our formal model and results for which I present in turn. This slide shows how relatedness affects value added by the multi-business firm to the value its businesses can create in isolation. The three lines reflect various levels of the current return advantage. The following patterns are noteworthy here. First, all lines are upward sloped, thus confirming the relatedness hypothesis and validating our model. Second, the red line with the positive current return advantage is above the green line with zero advantage, which is in turn above the blue line with the negative advantage. This second pattern validates our empirical illustration that the current return advantage is an important determinant of corporate value. Third, the same corporate value is added by the combination of weak relatedness and the positive current return advantage, as by the combination of strong relatedness and zero current return advantage. In other words, strong inducements as captured in this figure with current return advantages, the first dimension of inducements, offset weak relatedness, thus replacing the strong relatedness from the condition previously deemed necessary for high corporate value. Finally, the slope for the relationship between corporate value and relatedness changes from nearly zero when the current return advantage is negative to strongly positive when the current return advantage is positive. This means that the first dimension of inducements strongly positively moderates the effect of relatedness on corporate value. To make it even more explicit, inducements determine when relatedness matters and when it does not. Only strong inducements captured in this figure with the current return advantage make relatedness pertinent. The next slide reveals how relatedness affects the value added by the multi-business firm with three levels of return volatility, the second dimension of inducements. You can see that both relatedness and inducements maintain their expected direct effects on value. What is intriguing is that the same value can be added by the combination of the weak relatedness and high return volatility, as by the combination of the strong relatedness and low volatility. Thus, strong inducements as captured with their second dimension, return volatility, compensate for the weak relatedness. To reiterate, this offsetting makes the strong relatedness unnecessary for high corporate value. Finally, the slope for the relationship between corporate value and relatedness changes from weakly positive when return volatility is low to strongly positive when volatility is high. In other words, return volatility strongly positively moderates the effect of relatedness on value. Again, to make it crystal clear, inducements in this figure measured with return volatility determine when relatedness matters. The final set of results considers how relatedness affects the value added by the multi-business firm with 3 levels of return correlation, the third and the inverse proxy for inducements. Again, this is curious that the same value can be added by the combination of the moderate relatedness and negative return correlation, as by the combination of the very strong relatedness and positive correlation. Thus, strong inducements as captured with negative return correlation offset the weak relatedness, thus making the strong relatedness unnecessary for high corporate value. Finally, the slope for the relationship between the added value and relatedness changes from weakly positive when return correlation is positive to strongly positive when correlation is negative. Return correlation determines when relatedness matters. So what does our model achieve? We have investigated what increases the value of multi-business or multi-product firms like Apple, and we have confirmed that relatedness is an important factor in this respect that needs to be measured. However, we have also found that inducements represent another important factor that can offset the effect of relatedness on corporate value and moderates that effect. We have highlighted the 3 dimensions of inducements: the current return advantage, return volatility, and return correlation. An important result is that only strong inducements measured with these 3 dimensions make relatedness pertinent. In this sense, when resource redeployment is the benefit that justifies how multi-business firms add value above and beyond their separate businesses, inducements are the primary driver of the value of a multi-business firm, whereas relatedness is only secondary. We hope that our results will facilitate better decision-making by corporate managers, better valuation of multi-business firms by the investors, and better empirical tests by corporate strategy researchers. Thank you for watching this presentation. Please watch other videos on my YouTube channel on resource redeployment.